Decades ago, a man who had been overlooked, rejected, and pushed through countless setbacks sat down and wrote about something far more significant than success. He described what life actually is. Not the version your parents sold you, not the version self-help culture preaches, not the motivational fairy tale where hard work always pays off and good people always win. The raw blueprint of how human beings function and how the world often overlooks those who refuse to understand it. His name was Robert Greene, and the uncomfortable truth embedded in his writings has been misunderstood, softened, and repackaged for years because influence changes when ordinary people understand its mechanics. What Robert Greene discovered was not self-improvement theory. It was an observation of life itself. And by the end of this, you will see every relationship, every failure, every disappointment you have ever experienced through a lens so precise it will feel like someone turned the lights on in a room you have been navigating through your entire life. But there is one principle buried deep in his work, something most readers skip over entirely, that changes everything about how you approach the next decade of your existence. Robert Greene spent years moving from job to job, studying people from every level of society. He observed executives, artists, politicians, lawbreakers, entrepreneurs, and social climbers. He sat across from ambitious people, watched alliances form and dissolve, watched reputations rise and fade, and studied the hidden forces that influenced human behavior. Most people would have seen random events. Greene saw patterns. Most people would have blamed luck. Greene looked for principles, and here is where most people would have surrendered to confusion. Here is where ordinary people accept the comforting stories they have been given. Robert Greene did not. Through years of observation and research, he described a reality that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. He understood that life does not reward goodness alone. It rewards accuracy. Not accuracy of aim, accuracy of perception. The ability to see people, systems, and yourself without the comforting distortion of what you wish were true. Most people never achieve this. They live inside a story where loyalty is always returned, effort is always recognized, and the universe always has a sense of justice. Robert Greene would call these people vulnerable to someone else's ambition, not because he disliked them, but because he had watched with remarkable precision how the world actually operates. And it operates on a logic that often has little to do with fairness. This is the nature of the machine. Throughout his work, Greene highlighted one of his most thought-provoking observations. Human beings are driven by self-interest far more than they are driven by ideals. Most people hear that and hesitate. It sounds cynical, extreme, even pessimistic. But Greene was not making a moral statement. He was making an observational one. Think of it like gravity. Gravity is not mean. It does not dislike the man who falls from a height. It simply operates. It is a force. And if you understand it, you can build bridges, aircraft, and skyscrapers. If you deny it, reality does not adjust for you. Human self-interest is the psychological equivalent of gravity. It is not a flaw. It is part of the engine. When Robert Greene says that human beings are driven by self-interest, he does not mean that everyone is harmful. He means that every human being under sufficient pressure will prioritize their survival, their comfort, and their status before they prioritize yours. Not because they are villains, but because they are wired that way. And the exceptions you cling to, the friend who would never let you down, the partner who truly loves you unconditionally. Robert Greene would say, you have not yet seen those beliefs tested under enough pressure. This is not bitterness. This is awareness. Because the moment you accept this operating principle, you stop being shocked. You stop being hurt by the predictable. You stop blaming individuals for behaving exactly the way their nature often pushes them to behave. And you start building your life on a foundation that can actually hold weight, not on the unstable ground of other people's promises. Throughout history, Greene observed this lesson playing out repeatedly. Powerful families, political dynasties, business empires, and influential institutions appeared stable for decades, sometimes generations. Then circumstances changed, pressure arrived, Incentives shifted, and loyalties that once seemed permanent disappeared almost overnight. People who had praised leaders for years suddenly turned against them. Allies became competitors. Supporters faded away, not because human nature had changed, but because it had finally been revealed. Robert Greene spent decades documenting this pattern. He never forgot it, and neither should you. Everyone in your life is loyal to the conditions that make loyalty comfortable. Change the conditions, and you will see what was genuine and what was simply situational. This does not mean you should trust no one. It means you should understand the structure of trust. Trust is not a feeling. It is a framework, and like any framework, it requires maintenance, observation, and the honest admission that no material lasts forever under enough strain. Here is where Robert Greene's philosophy diverges from every motivational speech you have ever heard. He did not believe that positive thinking alone could reshape reality. He believed something far more practical and far more useful. He believed that life is a constant tension between two forces, and your future depends largely on which one you strengthen. The first force is your capacity for action. The combination of skill, strategic intelligence, discipline, courage, adaptability, and consistent effort that allows a person to influence circumstances. It is the quality that builds organizations, creates opportunities, and helps people recover from setbacks. It is the force that pushes back against disorder. The second force is circumstance itself, the unpredictable events that no human being controls. Economic downturns, health challenges, disappointment, bad timing, unexpected opportunity, the conditions of birth, the sudden challenge that arrives without warning. Greene repeatedly showed that life is shaped by both forces. And here is the part that should make you pay attention. A large part of your future will always remain outside your control. No amount of planning can eliminate uncertainty, but the part that belongs to you, your preparation, your discipline, your skill, and your ability to act, is where many outcomes are ultimately influenced. Here is where Robert Greene's philosophy diverges from every motivational speech you have ever heard. He did not believe you could become anything you wanted. He did not believe in unlimited potential. He believed something far more practical and far more useful. He believed that life is a constant struggle between two forces, and your future depends entirely on which one you strengthen. The first force he called mastery. This has nothing to do with simply being talented. Mastery is closer to effective capability, the combination of skill, strategic intelligence, decisiveness, energy, courage, and adaptability that allows a person to influence circumstances. It is the quality that builds organizations and helps people overcome adversity. It is the force that pushes back against disorder. The second force he called circumstance. Again, not fortune in the modern sense. Circumstance is the unpredictable flow of events that no human being controls. Illness, economic downturns, the conditions of birth, the disappointment you did not see coming, the opportunity that arrives years later than expected. Robert Greene often describes life as a series of unpredictable forces capable of reshaping everything in their path. And here is the part that should make you think carefully. He argued that a huge portion of human affairs remains outside your control. That means a large part of your life, the outcome, the result, the ending, is beyond your direct control. No amount of discipline, planning, or brilliance can completely remove uncertainty. But the other part belongs to you. And that part is where many outcomes are influenced. Most people waste their capacity to act on things that don't matter. On arguments with strangers on the internet, on relationships that have been over for years, on careers they chose to satisfy someone else's expectations, on habits that fill time but build nothing meaningful, and then when circumstance strikes, when challenges arrive, they have nothing left. No reserves, no preparation, no structure. They stand exposed and hope reality becomes easier. Reality rarely changes its rules. Robert Greene's message is precise. You cannot control what happens to you, but you can control whether you are prepared for what happens to you. And the difference between those two sentences is the difference between a life that is actively lived, and a life that is merely endured. Throughout history, Greene documented countless individuals who understood this principle. People who started with no wealth, no title, and few advantages, but possessed relentless strategic focus. Over years of discipline, calculated decisions, and intelligent action, they built influence that circumstances alone could never have provided. They observed, they waited, and when opportunity appeared, they moved with such precision that their progress became difficult to reverse. Their success lasted because it was built through personal effort. Compare that to those who inherit their position, who are handed influence by circumstance, and you will notice a pattern that Robert Greene documented repeatedly throughout history. Influence that is simply given can often disappear. Influence that is built tends to endure. What does that mean for you? Stop waiting for perfect circumstances. Start building the internal foundation that makes you capable regardless of circumstances. The goal is not to control every storm. The goal is to become the kind of person who moves through challenges and comes out stronger on the other side. Robert Greene wrote in the 48 Laws of Power, "Always say less than necessary." And throughout his work, he returns to a similar observation. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. And those few rarely challenge the opinion of the many. This is not a lesson about deception. It is a lesson about the fundamental operating system of human society. We live in a world of appearances. People do not evaluate you based on your internal reality. They evaluate you based on the signals you project, your posture, your tone, your consistency, the stories other people tell about you when you are not in the room. And the uncomfortable truth is that perception often matters as much as substance. Robert Greene observed that influential people understand the importance of appearance. They appear confident, disciplined, capable, and composed. And when possible, they genuinely cultivate those qualities. But when circumstances change, they adapt immediately. Not because morality is irrelevant, but because rigidity in a world of constant change often becomes a liability. Here is where people misread him. They think he is advising hypocrisy. He is not. He is advising adaptability. Consider the countless leaders, executives, and public figures Greene analyzed throughout history. Some rose through manipulation, calculated decisions, and aggressive ambition. They succeeded. They acquired influence. They held positions of power for years. And yet their victories carried a hidden cost. The methods they used weakened the trust required for long-term stability. They won every battle but spent the rest of their lives protecting what they had gained. They achieved influence but never achieved peace of mind. The lesson is precise. You can mislead, pressure, and maneuver your way to the top. Many have. But you will spend the rest of your life maintaining that image. The mental cost of sustained deception is enormous. Eventually, the mask merges with the face and you lose track of which one is real. Robert Greene's actual advice is far more sophisticated. Become the kind of person who does not need to pretend to be capable, but who understands that the world responds to appearances and who, therefore, ensures that the image accurately reflects the depth beneath it. In your life, this translates into a principle that can save you years of confusion. Stop trying to be understood. Start becoming undeniable. The people who spend years explaining themselves, justifying their decisions, defending their choices, and arguing for their worth are often playing the wrong game. The game is results. The game is demonstrated competence. The game is showing up with such consistency that the image and the reality become the same thing. When there is no gap between what you project and what you are, you become something very rare, a person who cannot be shaken by exposure because there is nothing significant to expose. In his study of history, Robert Greene describes something that will unsettle you because you will recognize it in your own life. He observed that all systems of power follow a cycle that is virtually inescapable. Strength produces order. Order produces prosperity. Prosperity produces comfort. Comfort produces weakness. Weakness produces collapse. And from the rubble, a new cycle begins. He did not invent this idea. Historians and philosophers had described similar cycles for centuries. But Greene added something many people miss. The engine driving the cycle is human nature itself. The same ambition that builds success is the ambition that eventually corrodes it. The same hunger that propels the founder is the hunger that eventually consumes the next generation. Great organizations do not usually collapse because of external enemies. They collapse because success changes the people who created it. Discipline becomes entitlement. Vigilance becomes complacency. Purpose becomes comfort. By the time the external threat arrives, the internal decay has already done most of the damage. Robert Greene watched the same pattern repeat itself across centuries of history as if the script were written before the actors were born. Now bring this lens to your own existence. Every person goes through this cycle, most of them unconsciously. You fight for something. You build something. You achieve some version of stability. And then slowly, without noticing, the comfort of that stability begins to dissolve the very discipline that created it. You stop training. You stop learning. You stop questioning. You coast. And the moment you coast, the river rises. Robert Greene's solution is one of the most counterintuitive prescriptions. In all of human psychology, he argues that tension is necessary for growth. The struggle you are trying to escape is often the very thing keeping you sharp. The discomfort you resent is frequently the mechanism preventing decline. The challenge you avoid is often the challenge that would force you to evolve. Applied to your life, the lesson is brutal. Comfort is not always the reward. Sometimes comfort is the beginning of decay. The moment you stop demanding, growth from yourself is the moment decline quietly begins. The argument you avoid may be the conversation that saves the relationship. The challenge you postpone may be the opportunity that transforms your future. The discomfort you fear may be the very thing keeping your mind alive. Most people spend their lives trying to eliminate friction. Robert Greene spent his career showing that friction is often what creates strength. Remove all resistance and you remove growth itself. The person who understands this stops asking, "How do I make life easier?" and starts asking, "How do I become stronger?" That question changes everything. There is a word that appears throughout Robert Greene's work with almost constant frequency: necessity. Necessity. He argues that necessity is one of the greatest forces shaping human character. When a person is comfortable, they reveal very little about themselves because nothing significant is being demanded. But place that same person under genuine pressure, remove their safety nets, force them to adapt or face serious consequences, and you will see for the first time what they are truly capable of. This is why Robert Greene observed that the greatest leaders, the sharpest minds, and the most effective strategists were often shaped by adversity rather than privilege. It was not talent alone that separated them. It was the fact that necessity removed every comfortable option except growth and improvement. Throughout history, Greene repeatedly showed how individuals who were underestimated, ignored, or dismissed often gained an enormous advantage. Not because weakness is powerful, but because obscurity creates space. When the world underestimates you, when people overlook you, when the pressure to perform is reduced, you are given something priceless: time. Time to build without interference. Time to observe without attracting attention. Time to prepare for the moment when you step out of the background and into the center of the game. Robert Greene himself lived this reality. For years he worked countless jobs, experienced repeated setbacks, and spent long periods as an outsider looking in. During those years he studied, wrote, observed, researched, and refined the insights that would eventually become some of the most influential books on power and human behavior in the modern world. None of it happened overnight. None of it was recognized immediately. He planted seeds long before anyone noticed the results. And that might be the most profound lesson of all, because most people will not do the work unless the reward is visible, unless the applause is audible, unless the payoff is immediate. Robert Greene would call this the mentality of the spectator, the person who acts only when someone is watching, the person who builds only when validation is guaranteed. The person of mastery acts because the work itself transforms them, not because it will be rewarded, but because without it, they gradually become less capable. So the question becomes simple. What are you doing when nobody is watching? What are you building while everyone else is distracted? What skills are you developing while others are waiting for permission? Because necessity reveals character, pressure reveals character, adversity reveals character. And the people who learn to use those forces instead of fearing them become extraordinarily resilient. When the moment finally arrives, it looks like luck to everyone else. But it was never luck. It was preparation hidden behind years of invisibility. So here is life as Robert Greene sees it. You were born into a world that does not revolve around you, not in a hostile way, in an indifferent way. The river does not hate the house it floods. It simply follows its course. You were surrounded from birth by people who may support you when it is comfortable and distance themselves when it is not. Not because they are bad people, because self-interest is a powerful force in human psychology, and that force does not disappear. You are given a body that ages, a mind that can mislead itself, and a window of time that is shorter than you think. Much of what happens to you will be shaped by forces you cannot see, predict, or control. And the response to all of this, the Robert Greene response, is not despair. It is precision. Build your mastery, not the artificial discipline of productivity shortcuts and motivational slogans, the real kind. The ability to see the world as it is and move through it without losing your balance. The ability to experience major setbacks and still possess the internal foundation to rebuild. The ability to read people not as you wish they were, but as their actions consistently reveal them to be. Prepare for uncertainty. Strengthen the foundation before challenges arrive. Develop skills that cannot easily be taken from you. Cultivate relationships that have been tested, not merely enjoyed. Save when there is no crisis, so that when a challenge appears, you are not dependent on luck. Accept the cycle. Know that comfort is temporary. Know that your strength will be tested. Know that the moment you believe everything is secure is often the moment circumstances begin to change. And above all, act. Because Robert Greene's strongest criticism was rarely directed at the ambitious, the competitive, or even the deceptive. It was directed at the passive, at the person who watches life happen from the sidelines and says, "What can I do?" At the person who has been given talent, intelligence, opportunity, and time, but spends all four waiting for permission. One lesson appears again and again throughout Greene's work. The world rewards those who move. Whether you succeed immediately or encounter setbacks repeatedly is often less important than your willingness to engage with reality itself. At least the person who acted gained experience. The person who remained frozen gained nothing. The people Greene studied most intensely were not extraordinary because they avoided mistakes. They were extraordinary because they refused to remain motionless. They understood that action creates clarity. Action creates momentum. Action creates possibility. And in the end, that may be the most important lesson of all. Life will challenge you. Circumstances will change. People will disappoint you. Plans will fall apart. But your responsibility remains the same. Become the kind of person who can rebuild from whatever remains. Robert Greene spent decades studying people who transformed adversity into advantage. Individuals who were rejected, ignored, underestimated, and pushed to the margins of society. Again and again he found the same pattern. The people who changed history were rarely the people given ideal circumstances. They were the people who refused to give up when circumstances turned against them. They did not wait for the world to invite them back into the game. They created something the world could not ignore. And that might be the most profound lesson of all. Because most people will not do the work unless the reward is visible, unless the applause is audible, unless the payoff is immediate. Robert Greene would call this the mentality of the spectator. The person who acts only when someone is watching. The person who performs rather than builds. The person who needs validation before effort. But the person of mastery acts because the work itself becomes part of their identity. They do not train because someone is watching. They train because remaining unprepared is unacceptable. They do not study because there is an exam. They study because ignorance carries a cost. They do not create because success is guaranteed. They create because creation itself becomes necessary. The people. Greene admired most planted seeds in fields they knew they might never harvest. They spent years building skills, knowledge, influence, and resilience long before anyone recognized their value. While everyone else chased immediate rewards, they invested in long-term capability, and capability compounds. Most people underestimate what can happen in 10 years because they are obsessed with what can happen in 10 days. They abandon the process before the results appear. They quit when recognition fails to arrive. They confuse invisibility with failure, but invisibility is often where the real work happens. It is where skills are built. It is where character is shaped. It is where future success is quietly constructed beyond the view of the crowd. The lesson is simple. Stop measuring your progress by applause. Stop measuring your worth by recognition. Stop measuring your effort by immediate results. The world often rewards people long after the work was done, long after the sacrifice was made, long after everyone else stopped paying attention. If you can continue building during that silence, you possess something rare, because the people who eventually shape the future are almost always the people who learned how to work without being seen. If you are still here, understand something. Most people will hear these ideas and do nothing with them. They will nod. They will agree. They will feel inspired for a few minutes. Then they will return to the exact habits, assumptions, and patterns that created their problems in the first place. They will go back to consuming content that asks nothing of them. Content that entertains but never transforms. Content that comforts but never challenges. Do not be one of them. The ideas you have encountered here are not theories. They are observations about reality itself. They are tools, and tools only matter when they are used. The question is not whether Robert Greene was right. The question is whether you are willing to test these principles against your own life. Will you observe people more carefully? Will you stop confusing words with actions? Will you prepare for uncertainty before uncertainty arrives? Will you build skills that cannot be taken from you? Will you stop waiting for permission and start acting? Because in the end, everything comes back to that decision. Most people spend their lives reacting. A small number spend their lives creating. Most people allow circumstances to shape them. A small number shape themselves despite circumstances. Most people wait. A small number move. The difference between those groups is not intelligence. It is not talent. It is not luck. It is the willingness to act while others hesitate. Robert Greene spent his life studying the individuals who left a mark on history. Different centuries, different countries, different professions, different personalities. Yet they all shared one characteristic. They accepted reality as it was and acted accordingly. They did not waste their lives wishing the world were different. They learned its rules. They adapted to them. They mastered them. And that is the final lesson. Reality does not reward wishful thinking. Reality rewards clarity. The clearer you see, the stronger you become. The stronger you become, the more freedom you possess. And freedom, real freedom, begins the moment you stop waiting for the world to change and start changing yourself. Subscribe if you haven't.